Welcome back to Rocker's Beer Review. Today's review is a special one. It's Winger, it's album number 7, called Number 7. But what's it going to be like? Is it going to be as good as their albums of the 80s? Keep watching to find out. After the review of Extreme's album 6, now we've got Winger's new album that's called 7 because, like Extreme, this is their 7th album. Winger are another band that have been going since the sort of late 1980s. Their first album, their debut album, came out in 1988. And they've been going a long time, although, you know, similar to Extreme, they haven't really released loads of albums considering how long they've been going for. Yeah, they've had breaks and stuff where they've sort of been on hiatus, as it were, you know, and they're not doing any albums. But, you know, over this period of time, you would have expected more albums. So we've only got 7. One thing I would say, though, you know, they all give something a little bit different, and they're all really good albums. You'll see throughout the review of this album that I'm a big fan of Winger. I think they're a really great and a really underrated band. You know, they're one of these sort of bands that when they came out, they got a lot of grief. I think it was especially because of their looks. And certainly the second album was very much sort of a little bit sort of pop metal, and it was right at the height, right at the end of really the hair metal scene, and they were one of the sort of big bands that sort of were highlighted for the fact that they would everything that was wrong with music apparently at the time. Their second album, In the Heart of the Young, was actually probably their biggest selling album, and that's the album that should have really kick-started their career into really big things. But of course, we're getting into the early 90s, and grunge music wasn't really far away, and everyone knows that grunge did kill the metal. So anyway, let's kick off this review of the album. It's number 7 with the first track, which is called Proud Desperado. Starts with a chunky riff and almost like chant-like backing vocals. It's a real sort of call to arms sort of song, you know, a bit anthemic and stuff. But to me, the chorus is a little weak. The song just doesn't quite kick things off as hard and as heavy as I'd like, really. I don't think it's a good choice of the opening track, and one that I would have different as the first track. I'll let you know as we go through the album. It's good, if a little bit sort of Winger by numbers, really. You know, the vocal delivery's all fine, the lyrics are just not quite there, and even the guitar solo is not up there with Red Beach's best. Fortunately, though, the album really kicks off with track 2, I think, Heaven's Falling. Although it's got a less sort of heavy guitar sound, the vocals are definitely a big step up, as is the songwriting. It's definitely better. And this song's got more of a sort of sing-along sort of quality. It reminds me a little bit of the Better Days Coming from the previous album. And again, the solo, I think, is much better thought out, with a sort of melodic guitar break, giving a little bit more gravitas to the song itself. It's where I think the albums are really kicking off from. And track 3, I think this is where it gets even more interesting, and I think this is Winger at the top of their game. The song's called Tears of Blood, and it kicks off with a slower paced riff and guitar break, and the song is definitely slower, it's darker, it's heavier, and the vocals are there's much more emotion, there's more dripping of emotion as Kip really you really feel the emotion when he sings this song. And it really sort of, in my opinion, I think really sort of shows off how good a singer he is. It's much more emotional, this sort of track, and I think at the moment it's probably my favourite track on the album. Track 4 is called Resurrect Me. Again, starts off with a big guitar lead part before it goes into a sort of the vocal line. And again, it's got a little bit of a sing-along, a sort of slightly breezy chorus. But no point, I think, are we getting to the point where, when I say breezy, that we're getting to the point where we're verging on pop metal like some of their earlier stuff. It's still got a bit of a harder edge to it. It's still, you know, later day Winger, really. And another fine guitar solo by Red Beach. Track 5 is called A Voodoo Fire. It brings a bit more sort of funk into the mix. Again, it's a slower pace sort of track. Great solo. I'm going to say that once, I'll say it along many times in this, because I think Red Beach is up there with my favourite sort of hard rock guitarists. This song though, it's just very well written and classic Winger. Then we sort of change up a bit with Broken Glass. It breaks things up, excuse the pun, and it's their sort of first ballad on the album. For me, it's a really good song. Winger do make really good ballads, and it really sort of helps, I suppose, when you've got such a great vocalist in Kip Winger, whose vocals really, or his sort of voice, just hasn't really changed or deteriorated over all these sort of 30 odd years. I think Broken Glass really shows off his vocal prowess. It's a really good ballad, and it's not usual that I would probably find the ballads to be some of the best songs on an album, but I think this is really, really good and definitely worth checking out. I really like this one. The next track is I think it's quite different. It's called It's Okay. It's quite different than anything else on the album. It's quite difficult to describe, but yes, it's slower. It's a little bit more, I don't know, probably a little bit more offbeat than the other songs. It starts with Reb doing his sort of well, I don't know if he's ever done it before, but doing his sort of like Living on a Prayer sort of sound, you know, with the talk box giving that sort of sound at the beginning. There's quite a lot of different vocals, and by that I mean there's different voices. Obviously Kip Winger's the main voice here, but I'm sure we're getting Reb Beach singing quite a lot, not only the backing vocals, but he's singing a couple of the verses as well. So just when you think, oh, well, we're getting two vocalists here, then there's definitely, I'm sure there's a third voice. I can't find anything on the internet to tell me otherwise, but the third voice could be John Roth, because I know that he's the second guitarist. He also sings quite a lot of stuff with them, backing vocals, especially live. He's got a good voice. He's got a good prowess as a vocalist as well. So I'm sure that he contributes to it as well. It could be someone else. There are credits for other vocalists or backing vocalists on the album, so it could be them, but I'm putting my money on John Roth as the third vocalist. Definitely Red Beach though, because I do recognise his voice. I've heard it before, some of his solo stuff, some of the stuff that he does with Whitesnake when I've seen him live definitely sounds like him. And as I say, the track, it's not really, I don't think for me it really stands out as a good track, but it is quite different. It won't win the sort of Song of the Album awards, I don't think. It's just an okay track, and it's good that it's changed up a little bit. Still, the track after this, which is called Stick the Knife in with a Twist. For me, this is a real upbeat, rocking song, and I think this is the song that should have probably opened the album. It's got that vibe of some of the sort of other sort of big opening songs, certainly on the recent two albums. The opening song on Karma was called Deal with the Devil. It's very much along that sort of lines in terms of its upbeat. It's very fast. It's very rocking. It's a great opener. Also similar to the opening track of Best Days Coming, which was Midnight Driver of a Love Machine. That was the opening track on that album. So this song is good. It's hard rocking. It's got a big opening solo. It's got everything you want from a sort of classic Winger sound, and it's really, it's a good track. I mean, it's up there with one of the best tracks on the album. I think, you know, they should have really opened with this, because I think it just suits it. It seems strange that it's halfway through the album. It seems out of place, where I think Proud Desperado would have been better in the middle of the album than this one at the beginning. But that's just up to me. You know, the way these kids listen to albums, you never listen it from track 1 to track 12, do you? You mix them up. So maybe it doesn't really matter. But for me, it's a really good song anyway. And it's pretty good. So, One Light to Burn, that comes next. It's a bit similar to that Tears of the Blood, the second song. It's got that sort of darker vibe, slower, a bit more ploddy, much more along the lines of the sort of the tracks that you got on the Winger's third album, Pull. It's much more along that sort of vein. I won't call it grungy, but there's definitely a much sort of darker sort of tone to it, and it's certainly a long way from being some of their sort of, you know, in their very sort of hair metal sort of songs. It's a good track. Track number 10, Do or Die. It starts off slow. You think it's going to be a sort of a mid-pace sort of ballad, but it does go quite heavy in places, so it's definitely not really a ballad. As I say, it's light and breezy to begin with. There's some great vocals, and again a really good solo. It's very much Winger, as you would expect. I don't want to say Winger by the numbers, but it is a little bit. If it's one thing that this album is not really doing much different, and that's the fact that they're not really reinventing themselves as a band. They're not going very, very different. This song is, it just shows that really. Time Bomb then continues the same sort of vibe, a slow, burning, and almost angry vocal from Kip. But again, it's still a good song. Doesn't jump out as much as some of the other songs. It's got slower bits, faster bits. The songwriting is definitely very good at a high level of standard, but I haven't seen Winger really push themselves. There's definitely a different vibe in these sort of last few songs that's more like Paul, and definitely less like any of the songs from the first two albums. And as I said, at this point when we're looking at these sort of, we got up to the first 11 songs, most of the album, there's very much of a vibe of almost like the best of Winger. There's only a subtle sort of hints of those first two albums. There's very much more of like Paul in terms of the vibe, and very much more of the sort of the newer Winger, I suppose, the 21st century modern sort of sounding Winger in terms of their last, from 4, Calmer, Better Days Coming, really, those 3 albums. There's much more of that sort of vibe, and I think some of those really sort of kicked things off better. This one here, it's a little bit too samely. If you're a big fan of Winger, then you'll probably think, yeah, this is a good album, but you'll get bored of it quickly. And again, that's a little bit of a detriment to it, but I just think that after waiting so long, I just wanted a bigger statement of intent, really. This is definitely an album that's led by Kip Winger, just like a lot of their albums. He stamps his fantastic bass player and obviously fantastic vocals all over this. But again, they're not doing really anything new. I mean, if you've never really listened to Winger before, you've only sort of heard a couple of tracks and you're sort of thinking, oh, well, let me see what this is all about, then I think this album, number 7, is a good starting point, really, because it, as I said, just comes across as a sort of best of. It's a good sort of, it gives you a good idea of what Winger can do, and both their sort of harder, softer, mid-pace sort of things. So, I've been rattling on about that, and I've almost forgotten about the last track. That's track 12. The last track is the 7.5 minute, I suppose, mini epic. It all comes back around. Starts off as a slow ballad. You got Kip playing sort of a piano and a sort of slow, sort of very sort of emotional vocal, and then it builds and builds into a very sort of, I suppose, almost epic, big sort of. Big sort of wall of sort of sound, really. One thing I've got to mention in terms of Red Beach's solo, this is definitely his best solo on the album. It's got an incredible sort of outro guitar solo. I mean, the last few albums, a lot of their albums, they almost like Reb to do a bit of a, to have a bit of a showcase on the last song, and it's usually the longest song. So you're looking at certainly Witness from Karma. Those are really a long and a great sort of overextended guitar solo at the end. But even sort of, it's got the sort of vibe of things like In the Heart of the Young, from that album, or heading for a Heartbreak from their first album. It's got that sort of, it's a bit longer. It's something that Winger sort of have put in, and they've talked about it, although I don't know how progressive they are, but they like to say, oh yeah, I mean, Kip Winger's even said, oh yeah, we're the hair metal version of Dream Theater. I don't think they're anywhere near that sort of level of progressive, but there is a sort of progressive element. I'd say probably less so though in this album than probably the last one though. but it gives them a little bit more, I suppose, a little bit more gravitas and a bit more. You know that they're good. They're really good musicians here. They're not like Poison, for example, where I think people like CZ DeVille gets hounded a little bit because he's a bit of a crap guitarist. Red Beach is definitely one of the best guitarists, and if you want to call him a hair metal, then so be it. I mean, to me, he's up there with the likes of George Lynch. I mean, not necessarily Eddie Van Halen, but he's got that sort of sound. He's definitely a very sort of 80s sort of guitar metal sound. So, and I think, people don't really give Winger the sort of, don't give them the respect they need for the fact that they're great musicians. A lot of that came in the sort of 80s and early 90s, those first two albums. The promo shots, they were very much had big hair, all the hairspray, all the sort of spandex, all the sort of big sort of glam clothing, and I think people thought it was all about image and less about sort of sound. And these guys are the top of their game. Kip Winger, has done symphonies and ballets and stuff like that, so he's a great musician. Red Beach has been in Whitesnake, he's been in Dokken, he's been in Winger all through the time. He's a co-writer of most of the songs. John Roth, who's the second guitarist, he's been there since sort of like he was a sort of touring member in the 90s, but he became a full-time member, I think, probably 20 odd years ago. He's a great guitarist. I mean, he's a guitarist now in Giant, and Dan Huff was a brilliant guitarist, or still is a brilliant guitarist, I'm sure. But when he was in Giant, he was the big guitar sound. So to fill those boots, you wouldn't go into that if you were an average guitar player. We've obviously got the full lineup here. Rod Modgenson also done lots of stuff with Dixie Dex. We've got Paul Taylor as well, that wasn't in the band for a long time, but he was one of the original members of backing keyboards. So I think it's a really good band effort. I follow them a lot on Facebook, and they're doing lots of live shows, and they seem to be going down a treat. It's a bit disappointing that they were going to play here with Skid Row, but then they sort of decided they couldn't afford to do it, and they were in the UK on a supporting Steel Panther recently. So I mean, I think that Winger are a great band. This is a very good album. All of Winger's albums are good. I don't really think that any of their albums I would say, I wouldn't listen to that one, it's not so great. They've all bring something slightly different. This one is a little bit more of an amalgamation of their last sort of 3-4 albums, but it's definitely worth a spin. If you like hard rock music, if you're a fan of 80s metal, then I think you'll like this. There's a modern spin on it. It's similar, I suppose, to what Extreme done. I think Extreme took a few more chances than Winger have on this album, and I think that's why I think the Extreme one is a better album than this. But there's a similarity. It's a hard rock 80s. He's got one foot in the 80s hard rock scene, but then there's a modern sound to it as well. So there's my review for Winger 7. I hope you enjoyed it. I haven't gone on too long. It's definitely worth a try. But let me know what you think of it if you've heard it already. Let me know what you think of Winger. I think that, with the likes of Metallica, the likes of Beavis and Butthead, they really gave Winger a bad reputation. And I think that a lot of people have slept on Winger too much. They've not given them the coverage that they need. I'm going to do a ranking of their albums. I know they've only done 7 albums, but I think it's the right sort of time to do it. It's quite a difficult one to rank because I think, as I said, 7 albums, they've all been of good quality. Where certain ones fit within certain eras is going to be difficult. It's difficult to really sort of see which one really sticks out. I think I know what I'm going to have as my first choice, and I think I know now what I'm going to put as my last choice, but the ones in between is going to be a bit difficult. But let me know if you're a fan of Winger and what you think the best albums are. What songs do you like? Really interested to know, because I think Winger, they don't get much coverage. They're not necessarily in the news much. you know, with the likes of in the 80s, it was all talking about Bon Jovi and Guns N' Roses and Motley Crue and Skid Row and those sort of bands, and Winger were left behind. So want to give them a bit more sort of coverage, and I hope that there's some fans out there that finally watch this video, but also comment on it and let me know what you think. So, hope you've enjoyed this video today. As I said, please subscribe. We're kicking off this summer of rock reviews. We've done an Extreme. This one's a Winger. The next one I think I'm going to do is the new Foo Fighters. It's only been out a few weeks now, so I'm going to be doing a review of that. Then we've got that quite special album, probably one of my albums of the year, from Crownlands. If Big Rush fans should definitely watch out for that video. So please give me a subscribe if you're not a subscriber. Give it a thumbs up if you like the video. If you like the content, I really like hearing your comments. And until the next one, you know what you're going to do. Keep on rocking.